What if promotion and relegation were added to college sports? Well, that is what this video is going to be discussing. Basically, if you take a look at what's on screen here, all the teams that have FBS programs were originally placed based on their 2024 football performance, and then the top three teams and bottom three teams of each conference were promoted and relegated respectively based on their 2025 football performance, and then this happened once again based on their 2026 basketball performance. If you want to take a look at the structure of the conferences, obviously at the bottom we have those playing at the FCS level. The top three there will be moving up to become independents, and then the bottom three there are not demoted but like relegated back down to the FCS level, and the top three go up to Conference USA. Same goes to the MAC, then the Mountain West, then the Sun Belt, then the American, then the Pac-12, then the ACC, then the Big 12, the SEC, and then the Big 10, which will be the highest level of sports play. I will be going over each team and about a hyper summary of their journey in this simulation so far. This is based on real life results, so that's why this has taken a little bit of a while to make, as this is based on the most recent 2025 football season and the technically still going 2026 basketball season, but I figured that the results are about as solid as they could be by this point. So let's first take a look at our teams that got relegated down to the FCS level: Delaware, Georgia State, Kent State, Sacramento State, UMass, and UTEP. Those that have recently moved down based on just this basketball season are notified with this red arrow here. Let's start with talking about Delaware. The independent conference for the 2025 season was incredibly brutal. There were exactly 6 teams, which means you either got promoted to Conference USA or you got knocked down to the FCS level. It turns out the independent competition was incredibly brutal, as the top 3 that ended up moving up that year were Kennesaw State, the real life Conference USA winner, Southern Miss, who went 8-4, and the fellow just moved up to FBS, Missouri State, who went 7-5. Delaware did just not good enough to make it, going 6-6. So they got relegated down to the FCS level once again, where in basketball season they did not even do close to good enough to getting promoted back up. Georgia State is a truly tragic one, where they got placed in Conference USA at the very start, but then did extremely poorly in the 2025 football season, and then once again in the 2026 basketball season. So they are all the way back down to the FCS level at this point. Kent State shouldn't really be a surprise of why they're here. They were absolutely horrible in 2024, so they were automatically, their placement was at the independent level. And once again, even though they had a very, very impressive turnaround, going 5-7, this was not good enough for them to get into Conference USA, thus got relegated back down the FCS level. Sacramento State, they just announced they were going to move to the FBS level during this winter, and so I decided to include them in the independent conference for the basketball season. Unfortunately, they did not live up to expectations, so they're getting sent right back down to the FCS. UMass, I don't really need to talk about. They were horrible this 2025 season, and they were just bad enough in 2024 to already be in independent, so they got sent back down to FCS as well. UTEP is the same story as Georgia State. Started in Conference USA, was horrible in both basketball and football, so now they're back down to the FCS level. Moving on to our current FBS independents. Ball State actually started out this in Conference USA, obviously because they just moved down because of their basketball, but they did manage to survive the 2025 football season in Conference USA, but they did poorly enough in the basketball season to get moved down to the independent level. McNeese, which is our first case of having a strong enough basketball program to now get moved up to consideration for FBS. We'll have to see what they're going to do. We'll see if they survive at this level of play. Middle Tennessee actually got relegated from Conference USA in the 2025 football season, but they did just good enough to survive in basketball season. Montana came from the other direction, where they had a fantastic football season, so they got moved up from the FCS level, but did just okay enough to stay at the independent level. Southern Miss, which we actually discussed earlier when talking about who is independent going into the football season, did good enough to get promoted to Conference USA in football 2025, but their basketball did so poorly that they're now back down at independent. So we'll see what's going to happen in the baseball season. ULM is the first case of being in a conference and then now dropping two. I guess Georgia State and UTEP technically also dropped two, as they were in Conference USA, dropped to independent, and then also dropped to FCS. ULM started out in the MAC and has dropped to Conference USA in football, and has now dropped again due to basketball. And then we got our last two, which are strong FCS basketball programs, which are Villanova and Yale. Obviously, you can tell that this is all theoretical because this would never happen in real life, breaking up the Ivy League so that Yale could compete in FBS football. Obviously, this would never happen, but I think for the sake of conversation and theorizing, let's just say that Yale did good enough in basketball, so now they have a chance to compete at the FBS level, and they'll have to earn their way into a conference with a strong baseball season. Moving on to Conference USA. First, we have two relegations with Air Force and Central Michigan. Air Force played in the MAC, and they did just good enough to survive football season, but did not do good enough as their basketball program is actually horrible, so now they're down here in Conference USA. Central Michigan actually went up to the MAC in football season because that's just how low of competition Conference USA was for football, but they then got moved back down because of their not great basketball. Over here we have Charlotte, who actually moved down in football season. They started out in the MAC, and now they're down in Conference USA. But they managed to just survive, so they're chilling in Conference USA right now. FAU kind of just has been here the entire time. Not really much to talk about. Illinois State. Illinois State made it to the FCS national title game. So with that, I decided, okay, we'll have them be an independent for basketball season. And honestly, they were the best independent team for basketball. So now, obviously, they're getting rewarded by moving up to Conference USA. And I think it'd actually be interesting to see Illinois State play at the FBS level, as I think they'd actually be able to compete in like a lower conference such as this. Kennesaw State started out as independent, won the real-life Conference USA, so they got promoted into this conference, where in basketball they were mediocre, so they ended up just staying here. Missouri State did just good enough to get out of independence as well, and once again, kind of like Kennesaw State, they're just staying here for their mediocre basketball program. Montana State, the FCS champion of last year, has a similar story to Illinois State, to where they won FCS, so that they now were placed in the FBS independent, and did good enough at basketball to then move up to Conference USA. New Mexico State has been here the whole time, so not really much to talk about there. North Dakota State just announced they're moving to the FBS level, so I moved them to the FBS Independent Conference for basketball. And because they're doing solid, they're probably going to win their conference in real life, so they're getting moved up to Conference USA for the Promotion and Relegation League. Rice started out in the MAC, stayed in the MAC for football season, but unfortunately their basketball was just too bad, so they're now down here in Conference USA. Temple and Wyoming both have similar stories where they've replaced in Conference USA and haven't moved since. Moving on to the MAC, we start out with Akron, a team that started out in Conference USA, but their basketball team is actually pretty solid, so they managed to move up to the MAC. App State started out in the Mountain West, stayed there, and has now moved down. So similar story to Akron, but the opposite. Coastal actually moved down here because of their football season. The fact that they got 6 wins is actually remarkable because they're bad. So honestly, they were bad enough to move down from the Mountain West to the MAC in football season, whereas in basketball they did enough to just maintain. Eastern Michigan has been here the whole time, so not really much to discuss there. FIU also started out in Conference USA, but now they moved up in football season because they did pretty decent, but their basketball is mediocre, so they're still here. Louisiana Tech was actually on the cusp for getting relegated down to Conference USA. Them and Rice were actually very similar in terms of how good their basketball was, but ultimately Louisiana Tech came out on top, and so they're staying in the MAC. Nevada actually started out in the MAC, but then moved down to Conference USA because of their horrible football, but because of their basketball is actually pretty decent, they got moved up. Oklahoma State and Oregon State both started out in the Mountain West, and because of their absolutely horrid football seasons, they got moved down to the MAC, and they both maintained their basketball, so they're still here. San Jose State has actually been relegated twice. They started out in the Sun Belt, but then they had a bad football season and then a bad basketball season, so now they're down here in the MAC. Tulsa is another team that started out in Conference USA, but moved up due to their pretty strong basketball program. UAB's been here the whole time, so not much to discuss there. And Western Michigan, despite how good their football season went, didn't do good enough to get promoted out of the Mountain West, and unfortunately did so poor in basketball that they're now down here in the MAC once again. All right, moving on to the Mountain West. Bowling Green and Colorado State actually both got relegated from the Sun Belt in football season, and they both did good enough to maintain their spot in the Mountain West. Florida State has been here the whole time, but funnily enough, at some point they've been in consideration for promotion, but both cases have failed, and so now they're still down here in the Mountain West. Georgia Southern started out in the Sun Belt and just got relegated due to this bad basketball season. Hawaii started out in the MAC, but got promoted due to their football program, but they did just good enough to stay at the Mountain West. Mississippi State has been here the whole time, so not much to discuss there. NIU just got relegated. Despite the fact that their football season did not go very well, they were not bad enough to get relegated. But they got relegated now because of their basketball. Old Dominion actually started here, got promoted to the Sun Belt, but unfortunately their basketball wasn't good enough, so now they're back down here in the Mountain West. Purdue, obviously known for their incredibly bad football program, but really good basketball, obviously they did just bad enough to not get promoted during football season, but now they're back because of their very, very strong basketball. San Diego State actually started out in Conference USA and have made their way all the way up to the Mountain West already. I'm actually really excited to see how far they're going to climb, especially with how low they started. South Alabama has been in this conference the whole time. Troy started out in the MAC, got promoted to the Mountain West in football, but now they're still here based on their pretty much mediocre basketball. Utah State was in consideration to get promoted last season in 2025 football, but didn't quite hit the mark to get that promotion, but their basketball is in the top 25, so they managed to get a promotion. Moving on to the Sun Belt, we have Arkansas State, who's been here the whole time, Buffalo, who actually got relegated from the American in football season because their football was not very good, but they're still here for basketball season. East Carolina, unfortunately, survived football season but did not basketball season, so now they're down here as well. Fresno has been here the whole time, same with Liberty and Maryland. New Mexico started out in the MAC and has gotten 2 promotions so far. So again, this is another team that I've been looking out for, and I'm curious to see how they're going to do in future seasons. North Texas just got promoted from the Mountain West in football season and did just good enough to maintain their spot in the Sun Belt. Northwestern maintained their spot in the Mountain West last season and now got that promotion because of their pretty strong basketball. Stanford did the same thing where they maintained their spot in the Mountain West before and now got promoted due to their basketball. Kansas State was on the cusp of getting relegated in football season but managed to survive. Unfortunately, the same did not happen in basketball season. Toledo has been here the whole time, so not really much to discuss there. UTSA had a pretty decent football season, but unfortunately got relegated to their absolutely horrible basketball, so now they're down here in the Sun Belt. The American is actually a pretty interesting discussion, where teams like Boston College and Louisiana have both gotten relegated twice as they both started out in the ACC, but have already made their way down to the American. Jacksonville State did just bad enough to where they got relegated in the basketball season and also didn't get promoted in the football season, so they managed to stay in the Pac-12 for football, but then they lost in basketball, and so now they're down here. Funnily enough, the competition for basketball was absolutely brutal. So Kentucky, despite being a top 30 basketball program, did not get promoted. That's how absolutely insane basketball was for the American Conference. And also you see undefeated Miami University, Miami of Ohio, still here, despite everything. That's how absolutely insane this conference was for basketball. Obviously, Sam Houston is down here because of their horrid football, as they started in the Pac-12, because they actually were decent in 2024. So now they're down here. Both UCLA and Wisconsin also have the same story, to where they got relegated down to the Sun Belt, but then got re-promoted due to their basketball. USF started out in the Sun Belt and then got promoted for football, and they ended up staying here for basketball. UCF and Western Kentucky have been here the whole time, and Virginia Tech started out in the Pac-12 and then got relegated due to football. Wake Forest, however, has made the journey all the way from the Mountain West, as they've gotten 2 promotions in the last 2 seasons. Moving on to the Pac-12, this is what I meant. Look at these 3 promotions for basketball: Arizona, Houston, and North Carolina. Arizona and Houston actually both started out in the Mountain West before getting promoted twice, and they're now in the Pac-12. North Carolina actually is a similar story, to where they got relegated in football down to the American, and now they're back up in the Pac-12 due to their basketball. Auburn, Cal, Cincinnati, and West Virginia, and Wazoo have all been here the whole time, and they're probably going to stay here for a hot minute. Marshall actually just got relegated from the ACC in football season, but they're still here. Utah got promoted in football season, and then they maintained for basketball. And then we got our 3 relegations for basketball season: Ohio and Rutgers, which these 2 are just new relegations, whereas Pittsburgh got promoted to the ACC in football and then got relegated back down due to basketball. Now we got the ACC. Army is one of those cases where they started out in the extremely high SEC, but have gotten relegated twice, and so they're down in the ACC. Arkansas and Baylor both started out in the Big 12 and then got relegated in football and maintained their spot during basketball. Iowa has been here the whole time, just barely missing out on promotion in both seasons. James Madison got promoted to the Big 12 in football and then got relegated back down due to basketball. Kansas and Michigan State both had 2 seasons in the Pac-12 before getting promoted now to the ACC due to their basketball. Minnesota and Nebraska have been here the whole time, where NC State started out in the Pac-12 and then got moved up due to their strong football. Tulane was actually in the Big 12 for 2 seasons, and thanks to their poor basketball, they are now down here in the ACC. Virginia started out in the American, but has since gotten 2 promotions, and so now they're up here in the ACC. And then there's Washington, who's also been here the whole time. The Big 12 is now made up of Colorado, who actually got relegated from the SEC. Same goes with Syracuse. They started out in the SEC, and they are now down here in the Big 12, but they did good enough just to stay in the Big 12. Whereas Duke and Duke is actually just has their own unique story, where they started out in the ACC, stayed there for football, and then got promoted for basketball. Florida started out in the Big 12, got relegated to the ACC because of football, and are now back up here because of basketball. Georgia Tech and Kansas State, Navy, I think just those 3 are the only 3 that have been here in the Big 12 this entire time. Whereas Memphis and UNLV just got relegated from the SEC due to their poor basketball, as they were able to maintain during football. Oklahoma and USC as well started out in the ACC, but had strong enough football to make their way up to the Big 12, but did not have strong enough basketball for them to get promoted again. And then there's Penn State, who started out all the way up in the Big 10, but has gotten relegated twice due to their incredibly mediocre football, and now their incredibly mediocre basketball. So now they're down here in the Big 12, although they were once in the highest conference. And then there's UConn, who did the opposite, where they started out in the they started out in the Pac-12, and then got moved up due to their football, and then once again due to their basketball. So now they're chilling here in the Big 12. The SEC, Boise State and Clemson have a similar story to where they started out in the Big 10, but both got relegated due to their football being not good enough. Louisville started out in the Big 12, maintained a season, and have now been promoted due to their basketball. LSU, Missouri, and South Carolina have been here the whole time. Michigan started out in the Big 12, maintained their spot in football, and then finally got that promotion. TCU follows a similar story to where they started out in the Big 12, stayed there, and finally got the promotion due to basketball. Notre Dame, Ole Miss, and Oregon managed to maintain one season in the Big 10, having a strong both 2024 and 2025 football season, but their basketball programs are a bit subpar, so they're now down in the SEC. Texas A&M started out in the Big 12 and have moved up to the SEC due to their strong football, and Vanderbilt follows the exact same story. And then we get to our final conference, the Big 10. Alabama started out in the SEC, but they made their way into the playoffs for 2025, so now they're up here in the Big 10. Arizona State has actually done exactly enough to maintain their spot in the Big 10, as they got into this conference initially for getting to the playoffs of 2024, and haven't done bad enough in either basketball or football to get relegated to the SEC. Even though Arizona kind of sticks out like a sore thumb in this conference, they managed to maintain it, and so I don't see a reason to relegate them just because they look like they don't belong. But really, their performance has been good enough to stay in this conference. BYU follows a similar story to Alabama, to where they were good enough in 2025 football to get promoted from the SEC and have maintained their spot due to their basketball. Georgia has honestly just been a strong program, and so they've been here the whole time. Georgia, Indiana, SMU, Tennessee, Texas, Ohio State. Most of these teams have had very, very strong football, and their basketball programs are very, very solid, so they've managed to keep their way in the Big 10. Whereas Illinois and Iowa State have just been promoted from the SEC as they maintained their spot in football, and then they had an incredibly strong basketball, so now they're up here in the Big 10. Miami follows a similar story to Alabama and BYU, to where they started out in the SEC, but they made their way up to the Big 10 due to their incredibly strong 2025 year. SMU is actually in the same boat as ASU, to where they look like they stick out on paper, but they've actually done good enough to maintain their spot in this conference. And then there's Texas Tech, who has been promoted all the way up from the Big 12, as they had incredibly strong years in 2025 football and 2026 basketball. So now they're up with the big boys. And that's going to be it for this video. If you want me to have more basketball discussions, feel free to let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next video.